thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Congressman.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate your audiences, and I think it's important for us to have these conversations not just on MSNBC and in the New York Times, but to really broaden the forums where people talk about important issues.
Yep, streaming culture, right? You're getting in on that, the youth vote here. I mean, I have to ask you, because obviously this morning Senator Dianne Feinstein passed away today. You are a congressman from California. Just your reaction to her passing. I know that that leaves a massive hole in California. What do you have to say, and just reflecting on her legacy?
Well, first of all, it's very sad. She's was a national icon, a state icon. I mean, she fought for women's rights, was a trailblazer on that, for reproductive rights. She was personally affected by gun violence as the mayor of San Francisco and led the fight to ban assault weapons. She has been such a champion on environmental issues. So she's in my thoughts, she's in my prayers, and it's a loss for the country and for the state.
Yeah, I mean, you have endorsed Barbara Lee for Senate. What is your opinion on who Gavin Newsom should appoint to replace Senator Feinstein? Because he has promised that he will appoint a black woman for that vacancy. Do you think Barbara Lee is the right choice to appoint?
Well, it shouldn't even be a choice. It's obvious he needs to appoint Barbara Lee. I mean, he made a commitment to appoint an African-American woman, and Barbara Lee has by far the most support. She's put in the work. She's mobilized the grassroots. She has the progressive support, and she's been working for 6 to 7 months. So to pass her over at this point really would be a very bad look, and it would upset a lot of people in the African-American community, not just in California, but around the country. I know that's how my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus feel.
Yeah, to be honest, it feels like this couldn't come at a worse time as well. An absence from the Democrats in both the Senate and the Senate Judiciary Committee opens up a weakness. It seems like we won't be able to run any judges through or appoint them proper for some time. I think this relates a lot to what we're here to talk about, because this issue, this gridlock, I mean, that's far from the only thing happening right now in Congress. It speaks to a level of institutional gridlock that I think alienates a lot of people. There are many independents in this country, people who don't vote, young, disaffected people who have strong moral convictions, but don't actually show up to the ballot box. I was wondering, you rep from California. I'm sure you've had more than your fair share of efforts speaking to the youth. How do you feel about the young folks in this country and their opinion on how things can or maybe can't get done at a federal level?
Well, they're the hope, and they are exasperated, candidly. I mean, they see change not happening fast enough. They see too much big money in politics, PAC money, lobbyist money. I've said, let's ban all PAC money. Let's ban all lobbyist money. Let's have members of Congress not become lobbyists. So they see these big oil, big pharma, big health insurance companies, big Wall Street firms having too much influence. And then they see positive things like let's forgive student loans, and it doesn't happen. And I've been in rooms where I said, I fought for it, the president did it, and they said, we really don't care, Ro. We don't want to hear it. I mean, the reality is we're still paying off these big loans. And I know what that's like. I had $100,000 of loans. I've done very well in life now, but there was a time in my 20s where I had to go on forbearance, where I couldn't make that payment. So if you're in that situation, it doesn't really matter who's advocating what. The bottom line is your life hasn't changed. And from what young people want to see is two things. One, they want to see actual results for them to keep coming out to vote. And two, they want to see real fight. So what does that look like? Well, why didn't we zero out the loans once we did this before it went to the Supreme Court? Why don't we have a halt on payment now and be more assertive? We've got to push on the issues they care about.
You talk about the influence of big money in politics. David Sachs hosted a fundraiser for you. This was reported by Puck News and then followed up by the American Prospect. How do you square your rhetoric on getting big money out of politics and then also David Sachs, who's a big Republican donor, PayPal guy, hosting a fundraiser for you?
Well, he supported Democrats as well, but I think it's a fair question. I take no PAC money. I take no lobbyist money. I don't have any super PAC. So I do have individuals contribute, and those individuals are people who have are maxed out at $3,300. And in raising money, I mean, yes, David Sachs contributed. Other leaders in Silicon Valley and others have contributed. Teachers have contributed. Nurses have contributed. But I don't take any of the corporate money. I don't take any political action money. I don't take any lobbyist money. Is that fully clean? No, but it's much cleaner than the vast majority of members of Congress. And David Sachs did support me, and the reason he supported me was my advocacy for free speech on Twitter, where my private emails leaked, and I had said that they shouldn't censor the New York Post reporter, and they shouldn't have taken that down. And he also supported me because I had drafted a letter with the Congressional Progressive Caucus saying that there has to be dialogue on Ukraine, even though I've supported all of the Ukraine aid. And so we disagree on a lot of issues, but I think it's a strength that you can find certain common ground with people to agree on, and that's why he did support me.
Do you understand, though, why maybe some on the left may raise their eyebrows at that, and would you pledge not to take money from someone like Sachs in the future?
No, because I would pledge to be consistent on the positions I've had. I'm for a wealth tax. I'm for raising the minimum wage. I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for free public college. I'm for cutting the bloated defense budget. And I've done this despite taking support from an individual. So I would ask people on the left to say, look at my record. Look at where I've stood on the different issues and where I will go to David Sachs fundraiser and talk about taxing wealth. In fact, there's probably a clip of me saying, I think millionaires and billionaires should be taxed too much. Now, if I can find common ground with people on free speech or some other area, I think that's important for the majority coalition for progressives. So I will pledge to not taking money from PACs, to not taking money from lobbyists, to not having super PACs in a primary. I don't think we should unilaterally disarm against the Republicans or Trump, but certainly shouldn't have super PACs in a primary, and to being consistent on my views on taxation and progressive policy.
You know, I think this speaks to what we do as well. Of course, Emma and myself are live streamers. New technology, getting out there, talking to lots of folks with very little startup cost. What I've noticed, at least when I talk to people my age or younger, is that there is a fundamental, almost axiomatic lack of trust in politicians. And it really doesn't matter how clean they are. There's a fundamental, first principles,
Yeah.
And then everything after that is
they
like,
assume
okay,
you're corrupt.
Right. And, I don't think the assumption is entirely unfounded. We know Washington, of course, has had its fair share of scandals and corruption. In terms of individual behavior, it's difficult, I think, to project the image of authenticity, which is seemingly exactly what people are looking for. Donald Trump, of course, has captured the hearts of the Republican Party through what I would consider an extremely inauthentic bid at being real,
and he
talking.
speaks his mind.
It's just aesthetic.
Oh, it's fully aesthetic. It's not real. He lies all the time, but the aesthetic counts, And this is what I've been concerned with when it comes to Democratic fundraising. The Democrats, if you ask people about policy, would you like to see, the child tax credits? Would you like to see funding for this institution? Would you like to see this, that? You ask them about Democrat policies without saying Democrats, America loves it. 70% of Americans go for what Democrats sell.
Right.
You mention Democrats, now you're 50-50. It gets really tough. So the question is, why is there that gap? What is the disconnect between the popular policy and the, not unpopular, but gridlocked, Democratic Party?
That's a very thoughtful question. I would say a couple things. One, there was a mistake made in this country by both parties of offshoring our jobs, of allowing the middle class and working class to be hollowed out. We saw factory towns shutter. We saw the wealth disparity grow, CEO pay go from 15 to 1 to 300 to 1. So a lot of working class voters, a lot of middle class voters said, this system is not working. And that's why I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. Trump modeled that with the same grievance, and he said the status quo is not working. Look, if I was growing up or living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or Lordstown, Ohio, I'd probably vote against anyone in the status quo establishment too. My life has gotten materially worse. So the first thing the Democrats need to do is acknowledge that there were mistakes made by both parties in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The second thing is that we've got to get rid of the corporate influence in our party. Obama ran not taking PAC money, not taking lobbyist money, and telling the DNC not to take corporate money. Then suddenly now we're taking corporate money again. We've moved backwards from how Obama ran in 2008. Now, I'm not pure like Bernie Sanders, who could just do all of his grassroots fundraising at $27. I'm just being honest, right? That's the other thing. Like, people want honesty. If I came here and said, look, I'm doing all grassroots fundraising, they'd go Google it and say the guy's full of it. I take contributions, individual contributions, up to $3,300. But that's a lot better than having defense contractors, big pharma, big oil companies pour in money, and then people say, where's the progress? You're promising us Medicare for all. You're promising us free public college. You're promising us not a bloated defense budget, but then you've got all these special interests pouring in money into your campaigns. And so I think the Democratic Party needs a reform economic message, saying that the hollowing out of the working and middle class was wrong, and here's what we're going to do, and a reform political message. And we've got to show up and we've got to acknowledge that there were mistakes that the party made.
And I mean, there have been some steps that have been taken back, but I am encouraged by Biden going to the UAW picket line.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is, for me, one of the most seismic shifts in Democratic Party consensus that I think we can, at least as it relates to labor, in a long, long time. And I think it's important. Just your response to the insurgent labor movement and how this summer and into this fall, it feels like unions are winning back the public trust, and we're finally getting rid of that Reaganomics perspective about how bad unions are, and the public seems to be at least coming along with that in supporting the UAW and other, the SAG-AFTRA strike, for example.
It's inspiring. I was, the first member of Congress actually on the SAG picket lines, and I was really proud to be on the picket lines with UAW workers in Wayne and Toledo, and a bunch of us, Debbie Dingell, Rashida, and I, were calling on the president to come. We didn't think he would. I give the president tremendous credit for showing up with the workers and not having both sides of the issue. I mean, it's clear that the CEOs are making $30 million. They put $5 billion in stock buybacks. These workers are making $15-16, and they deserve a raise. They deserve to be made whole for the cuts they took in 2008. But you look at them, you look at what the Teamsters are doing with UPS, you look at the Starbucks workers, you look at Amazon, Chipotle. This is the next generation of finally people saying enough with the gross income inequality. And if we combine a new production agenda, bring back new manufacturing, bring back technology across America with a labor movement that requires fair wages, then I think we can start to stitch this country back together. Two mistakes that have been made. Why did we give all this money in the IRA to states that had no labor requirements? Alabama, Tennessee, right, hollowing out more of the working class. That was a mistake. See, this is where people get angry at the party. Okay, we like the IRA, but you're giving the money. The big three are taking it Tennessee and to Kentucky, and they're not good paying jobs. Second mistake, why did the governor in California veto the regulation saying that if you're going to have a big driverless truck over 10,000 pounds, that you should have a driver there, and side with the capital class, many in my district in Silicon Valley? I mean, if people fear technology displacing them, they're not opposed to technology, but they want to make sure they're part of the decisions with technology. So these are the types of things the Democratic Party needs to be for. We need to be for a working class labor agenda.
Yeah, no, that's the current fight, it seems. There's nothing that people, especially young people, I feel, distrust more than a public message of support for labor backed by nothing, just, the sentiment. Biden actually going down there, you going down there to the strikes, I think it speaks to what people are fighting over, at least on an aesthetic level. I'm sure you saw, but recently, following Biden's presence at the strike, Trump also went down there and wasn't at the strike. Yes. He spoke to a group of supporters at a non-union organized event, and media covered it as though he and Biden were both taking a shot, out there with the union. Some even just outright said that Trump was out there on the strike line. It seems like people are really eager to commit themselves to a pro-labor agenda. Hell, I mean, Trump ran on this back in 2016, right? Bring back Rust Belt jobs. Yeah. He didn't, of course, but people care about that stuff. And I think more so than any group right now, young people, because they're being born into a country where there seems to be very little hope of the future. They may be the hope of this country, but they look forward and they see a blighted abyss of gig jobs and no health coverage. I'm not surprised that they feel disaffected. How do you think the Dems could work to reach out to them?
That's a really great thought. Let me encapsulate it by saying they may be the hope of the country, but they feel no hope, right? That's kind of the irony of this next generation. And here's what I'm really proud of them. The Gen Z for Change and the climate groups, they've been the first ones on the front lines with the UAW workers, right? They're saying there's no difference between a climate movement and worker justice, that the climate new jobs have to be good paying jobs. Many of them have to be union jobs. There has to be a right to organize. Here's why I think we're not breaking through. Because Donald Trump, I saw his speech. I had to see his speech because I was on News Nation responding to him. And so they had the earpiece on and I heard his whole take. And if you didn't know anything, you'd say, Trump's saying they hollowed out your jobs left, the working class is getting shafted, I'm going to bring those jobs back. And if it was just that, you'd say, wow, the guy gets what I've been through. And part of the challenge for us as Democrats is showing up and validating people's anger. We can't just say, okay, we've created 13 million jobs, which we have. Unemployment is at record lows. Inflation is heading down. The average person sitting there saying, you know what? I'm still not making enough for groceries, rent, and gas. My income has gone down from what my father used to earn. My daughter is probably not going to have the same opportunities. And these folks are trying to sell me that the economy is great. Now, what we have to say is we understand the anger. But look at the record. Donald Trump had 4 years. There was no new steel plant. There were no new auto plants. More plants closed. We've just started.
For example.
Foxconn.
Yeah.
It's total a con game. He's validating your legitimate anger, but he's got no vision and solutions. Here are our vision and solutions, and then talk about what we have done, but say this is just step one on a scale of 1 to 10. That this is going to take a decade to rebuild because it took 40 years to deplete. And I think that kind of honest talk is what will connect with people. Instead of just right now, you've got two talking points. Trump is out there saying the economy is terrible. We're out there trying to say the economy is great. And people are saying, no, the economy is tough still. What we should be saying is we're starting to reverse the damage, but it's a long project and we need to continue to work on real solutions.
Just turning to foreign policy for a second, you've been a longtime critic of United States foreign policy and some of the interventionist elements of what we've engaged in. You also did vote yay on a bill denouncing the horrors of socialism, and you're one of the few progressives to do so. I mean, the whole squad voted no. Katie Porter in your state also voted no. Why did you take that vote? Because I think a lot of young people do identify with democratic socialism at the very least, and progressivism and socialism, they can have a dual track, right? I think that they kind of are connected. What's your response to that?
Well, I call myself a FDR Democrat with actually FDR plus Eleanor Roosevelt, because Eleanor Roosevelt was against the incarceration of the Japanese, and so a multiracial, multi-ethnic New Deal coalition. And part of the coalition of FDR were democratic socialists and liberals and progressives, and it was a majoritarian broad coalition. And I think we have to build that movement. But I wanted to make clear that I am for free enterprise. I am for the cooperation with business and labor to build America. I am not for the government owning things. I think when the progressives allow the Republicans to frame it in that way, they're depriving us of a majoritarian coalition. And what I'd like to do is build a majoritarian coalition for Medicare for all, for free public college, for a policy of bringing manufacturing back, for taxing wealth, and not have people say that, oh, the guy's a socialist, as they did to Bernie. I'll say, look, I represent a district with more wealth than anywhere in humanity. 1/3 of the S&P 500 is in my district. So I understand why people were upset, and there were people who were upset with that vote. But my goal is to try to make the progressive movement, without compromising my ideals, a majority movement that can, for the next 20 years, usher in a majority era. And I think FDR's example is instructive, where he didn't call himself a socialist, but he had a coalition of a lot of people fighting for progressive ideals.
Understood. I just feel that the United States' history of foreign interventions is marked by essentially overthrowing socialist governments and leftist leaders. And so I'm just trying to connect your very poignant critique of United States foreign policy with a vote saying that socialism is this evil.
Although my grandfather was part of Gandhi's independence movement and Nehruvian socialism back in the 1960s. I disagreed with the economics of it, but if you go to his Wikipedia page, Amarnath Vidyalankar, you'd see his advocacy, and you'd see that I'm deeply proud of my grandfather's activism. I certainly don't think the United States should have a license to intervene to topple regimes because they may be socialistic. That doesn't mean that I want socialism in the United States. So I think that there's a distinction between some of the foreign policy that was an overreach, whether it was the enabling of Pinochet, whether it was the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, whether it was Lumumba in the Congo. There are critiques of American foreign policy, of overreach, and I certainly don't think that America should be in the business of regime change.
Understood.
And I think the coalition building is the key, right? In my experiences seeing people online, their frustration, a lot of disaffected young folks and progressives, there is a strong perception, we don't need to get into whether or not, to what extent it's true, that Bernie Sanders was not looked favorably upon by the DNC, that there would have been significant internal opposition to him had he become president, that it existed while he was running, both times. Whether or not that's true, that fear that socialists or people who lean very progressive aren't allowed at the table is something that disillusions a lot of people. They're young, and young people are, of course, more inclined towards idealistic thinking. They're more likely to be politically radical in any direction, I feel. And they're concerned that there's not a seat at the table, that if getting into politics means they have to shut up and play the party line, that there's no point. And that anti-electoral message, or that feeling they get, I think it cuts a lot of them out of the process. It weakens them, which is a shame for all of us, because as we know, young people are the strongest Democratic, leaning group in the country. Is there something you think the Dems could do to show a sign that they are willing to open up that seat, even if you don't agree on the economics specifically, towards what you do care about?
Well, first of all, I think, having talked to young people, and correct me if I'm wrong or what your impression is, my sense is the three things that animate them the most. One is free healthcare. I mean, it's absurd in this country that you have people having medical debt, having co-pays, having to worry about them or their parents or grandparents getting healthcare. Two is free college or career training. They don't want to go into lifetime of debt to go become an electrician, carpenter, or go to college. And three is climate, that they want to see much bolder action. They don't understand how you can have the Willow Project be approved in the largest oil project on public land while professing to care about climate. They don't understand how Greta Thunberg, who I had in front of my committee, said it was a punch to the gut if you guys don't do anything to remove fossil fuel subsidies with accelerated depreciation in the United States, $7 trillion worldwide of fossil fuel subsidies. How are we not doing anything about that? So my view is, I don't think, that it's about the labels as much as it's about the policies. Why aren't we running the Democratic Party on Medicare for all as part of our party platform, a wealth tax when we have so much disparity, free public college, making sure that we actually are eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, making sure that we are not having new pipe approvals on public lands, making sure right now in California, in my state, there was a law passed to say don't have new drilling next to 3,000 feet of residential neighborhoods, but they're still approving the new drilling because it's a ballot initiative. I think what young people care about is the substance. And what they're sick of is politicians just giving the platitudes. Oh, big oil is bad, or we need universal health care, but then not endorsing the specific policies. And what Bernie did is he said, no, here are the specific things I stand for. And that's what appealed to them. And my view is we've got to be specific. We've got to have a platform that actually speaks to that, that's willing to fight the big interests, because invite other politicians in. My guess is if you said to them, do you support Bernie Sanders' Medicare for all? They'd quibble. Do you support free public college? They'd quibble. Do you support a wealth tax? They'd quibble. Are you firm in no permitting on public lands and no new permitting near residential areas? They'd hedge. And I think we need clarity there. And the second thing we need is to recognize that young people have the movement that can make this possible. Look, the miracle is not that Bernie Sanders lost. The miracle is that he almost won. Yeah, he almost won. I was his co-chair. I was in Nevada. I thought he was going to be the nominee. And then they coalesced and they got everyone to drop and they got Clyburn to endorse him. And from Nate Silver giving him a 75% chance of winning, it went to a 30% chance in 3-4 days. I've never seen anything like it. He was up in the polls in California. He was up in the polls in Texas. He was going to win it on Super Tuesday. And they coalesced. They got everyone to drop. They anointed Biden. And that's how they won. But they can't keep doing that. You know, Bernie came closer in 20 than he did in 16. I think a progressive would have won this time if it was an open seat. Biden's running, an incumbent president is always very hard. You defer. I guarantee you that if you get a strong progressive, running on this platform in 28, 32, 36, we can win, given what Bernie did. He climbed the mountain. We just have to get over it. And so my message to the young people is don't quit when you're at the 10-yard line. The hard work has been done.
I want to see if you could, I could get your assessment on the Republican Party right now in contrast to that, right? I mean, my view of it is that I have never seen them in such shambles, essentially. And I mean, they're always dysfunctional in their own way. But right now with the government shutdown looming and Kevin McCarthy being threatened with essentially losing his gavel because of these extremist members of the Republican Party, saying if you work with the Democrats in the Senate, Biden, we're done with you, essentially. Like, how difficult is it to even engage with the Republicans on the other side of the aisle in the midst of just how they've kind of sunk to the bottom? They've reached where they always were deteriorating towards, and now they can't govern, to put it mildly.
It's very frustrating because this wing of the party it doesn't even rhetorically embrace the populism that Trump runs on. You know, if you actually wanted to build new factories, if you actually cared about the working class, you'd have to spend money to do that. You'd have to spend money for factories. You'd have to have investments in the working class. This party just wants to cut.
Yeah.
So what do they want to cut? They want to cut funding for childcare. They want to cut funding for rental assistance. At a time where you have a housing crisis, they're saying don't help people buy homes or get rental assistance. They want to cut funding for schools. And it's their whole mantra is cut that funding, and at the same time, it's coupled with a nationalism. So it's very destructive. But what we need to counter it, in my view, is not just a status quo. Let's return to normal. Not just talking about the important freedoms, which are so important, reproductive rights and the threat on reproductive rights and voting rights. But a vision that says we understand that the American dream has slipped away. We can't turn back to normal. We have to have a transformational economic and political message. But the Republicans are, you know, they're just, it's grievance politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're seeing an end, at least for now, to bipartisanship as a shared norm. Obviously, there's some stuff that both sides work together on, but it seems like more and more Congress is just a site of willful obstructionism. The only time anything gets done is if it's absolutely necessary, and sometimes not even then. We're facing a government shutdown.
Right.
It's entirely possible things pan out really poorly for millions of workers.
Yeah.
You know, the degree of damage is potentially unimaginable. And all of this being done to, I mean, I've seen a number of proposals. Stop funding Ukraine, stop providing assistance there, you know, cut like 80% of the funding to low-income schools. It seems like, you know, we can get through this as long as people suffer. That seems to be the message. And it seems like through a lot of this, the Republicans are signaling, you know, maybe a loaded term, but fairly evil behavior. I think it goes beyond political unacceptability and trends into just a moral black hole. What a lot of people seem concerned with is that Democrats are aware of this, but maintain the norm of bipartisanship out of civility or, concern for coming across like the lower of the two. They don't want to look like they're taking the low ground. But I think the Republicans have taken the lowest ground. Marjorie Taylor Greene was throwing around Hunter Biden photos on the right in the Congress floor not too long ago. It's bad out there, you know. Are the Dems willing to, I guess, acknowledge, because Biden still talks about like a strong Republican Party and the value of bipartisanship. How do we move forward from this?
Well, he started to call out Marjorie Taylor Greene and the extremism now, But we've got to be more bold about calling them out when they are denying climate science, when they are basically providing handouts to these defense industry, healthcare industry, pharmaceutical industry, when they're not even willing to fund government and keep it open, when they're hijacking the country and saying, unless you cut funding to our poorest schools, we're going to do that. We do have to be clearer. But I'll answer your question with this. People want this country to come together. They're desperate for that. They see 70, 80% approval, Republicans and Democrats, on paid family leave, on child care, on raising the wage, on supporting workers. And they're wondering, why isn't that translating into Congress? And I think what people need to do is stop the bipartisanship of sort of the no labels, which is a civility of the 80s and 90s under the status quo, and say, let's build a bipartisanship on structural reform of the economy and politics, a bipartisanship to get rid of PAC and lobbyist money, to ban stock trading, to have term limits. That can be bipartisan. A bipartisanship to say we shouldn't have foreign interventions in places with our military to get into endless wars. A bipartisanship to say that we've got to provide people with health care and free public college, which may not be in Congress. But there are a lot of Republicans who support Medicare for all. I saw that when I was out there with Bernie. There are a lot of Republicans who believe we need to tax the ultra wealthy more. So I think what people want is a politics that is transformational, and then a willingness to build a coalition with everyone. That may not include the current people in Congress who are over influenced by lobbyists. We may need a new generation of elected leaders.
I wanted to follow through. I wanted to ask on that too. You know, you talk about conditional bipartisanship. Which
yeah, that's it. You're good with these phrases.
You know, we all
He's
talk.
the wordsmith.
You got all the tough questions. The tough questions are the wordsmith. But I think here's my hope with this. I'm not going to tell the senator who texted me saying, "Oh, Ro, this is great," because he saw the article of me doing this, and I invited him, and his schedule is busy. I think more people, Congress members and senators, need to come on forums like this to take tough questions, right? When I've gone on MSNBC time and time again, I've never gotten asked about David Sachs. I've never gotten asked about where funding, right? And people want these questions answered. I've never gotten asked about my vote on socialism, right? And so the reason politicians don't come out to places like this is they don't want to do the tough questions. I know when I go on those channels what they're going to ask me. And if I make a point enough about hitting the Republicans, they'll be like, yay, Ro. And I think what people need to do is have honest conversations like this and take tough questions. And no one's perfect in the political system. Bernie is probably as close as we got to being clean in terms of politics. But people want authenticity, and authenticity isn't a word. It means taking tough questions and giving real answers.
Are you ready for another tough one?
Yeah. Sure.
You wrote a letter inviting Narendra Modi to speak, and I know that he's a far-right Hindu nationalist. He had at one point not even been allowed to come to the United States because of his role in the Gujarat killings, basically, and his sanctioning of that. What was behind that decision, given the fact that I think a lot of progressives feel that Narendra Modi is someone we shouldn't be doing business with?
Well, he's the elected prime minister of India. I was very critical after the Gujarat riots and spoke out vehemently against him and supported the decision to deny him a visa at the time, which was quite controversial. My public statements have been for pluralism in India, rejecting right-wing nationalism. I'm of Hindu faith and have been willing to do that, and actually was invited to the Islamic Society ISNA National Conference after I went to India in a bipartisan delegation to India, where we did meet the prime minister and met with the foreign minister. But I also met with Gandhi's great grandson, and I met with, who's a dissident in the regime. And he tweeted out, I urge people to read what he said. And I met with Muslims in Haryana whose homes were being demolished. And I met with people in Manipur who were facing threats of nationalism against pluralism. I guess my view is India is a huge democracy, a huge country that's an ally, and it's better to be in the room engaging while raising human rights than not engaging the prime minister or others. And people can make a decision. There were 9 members who boycotted that speech to Congress. I said I respect their decision, but I want certain progressive voices to not boycott themselves, to be part of that conversation, to be meeting the prime minister and others and raising human rights. And Jasmine Crockett will tell you we directly raised with the foreign minister, with the prime minister, those human rights concerns in our meetings. And the press in India covered it. My view is that also can bring change.
That's a really difficult line to walk as well. You know, as the United States, we have enormous foreign influence, which has been used in the past to a great amount of harm. Nowadays, of course, we're not toppling socialist regimes day in and day out. That's great. I'm glad we changed that. But even now, you know, we cast a wide wake in our shadow. In speaking with Modi, maybe we enable, you know, certain tendencies or, you know, promote them in a kind of indirect legitimacy way. Donald Trump met with, you know, Kim Jong-un, for example. So, right, there's a wide spectrum of stuff like that going on. But I was wondering, from your opinion, because you have spoken out on foreign policy issues so many times, how is America supposed to tread carefully in an era where we're more responsible in how we deal with other countries, but also trying to promote good foreign policy abroad? For instance, we engage favorably with Saudi Arabia, despite their many, many human rights abuses. We don't with Iran. They do bad things too. What can we do to promote goodness abroad without, I guess, browbeating other countries with our economic and cultural power?
Well, first we have to model the best behavior in the United States by being for voting rights, by being for reproductive rights, by saying that we're not bashing immigrants, to really show what it is like to be the great, cohesive, multiracial democracy that America uniquely can be, and to be that vision for the world. So we've got to first start by doing that here at home. That's the most powerful thing that we can do. Second, while we want to lead in the world, recognizing that our values of pluralism and human rights are critical in shaping a rules-based world, we want to have enough humility. We want to know that, you know, there's some of these countries have been generations removed from colonialism, and that it can't come off as preaching. It's got to come off as, here are universal standards that we have a coalition of nations that believe in, that we need to work towards. Sometimes I think if it comes off as hectoring, you're going to have countries just say, well, why should we care? What are we going to, how are we going to advance human rights? So I think it has to be a strategic. And then third, we do have to provide an important role for our values. So we shouldn't just have economics dictate everything, which is too easy to do. But it's a very difficult question.
All right.
It certainly is.
Representative Khanna, we've got to wrap. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for your candor.
It's been a delight to speak with you.
Thank you.
Yes,
really
thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you.